All right. Looks like we're live. We'll wait a few minutes while folks are trickling in. Just watching more folks rolling in. Rohit, when in the office, did you get a room, same floor, or is this I know we switched up offices.
Yeah, this is our own meeting room, so.
Excellent. Alrighty, while people are rolling in, I think we will just cover some housekeeping items, go over how today's webinar it will work and what we'll cover. Rohit and Sagar, thank you both for leading this webinar today. And to give the audience an idea of what we will be covering today, we will be going mainly to focus on why and how to become data-driven from Sagar and Rohit. Both of these two have a wide variety of experience in the data-driven background and landscape. And Rohit spent some time at VY Capital, and he'll be touching on his experience there. And we'll be hearing from Sagar from his experiences getting RunwayFBU up and running. And the intent here is really for the audience to get a perspective on how to become data-driven. We will be having a Q&A session, of course, at the end of the webinar. We value everyone's participation. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we'll address as many of these live during the webinar. We'll also cover everything else towards the end once we get through some of these slides. If anyone has technical issues, if there's any difficulties, our team is on the other side for support. Just feel free to send in a chat and they'll be happy to assist. And of course, you all should be able to see we are recording today's session. So anyone that was registered will get a link sent to them. And as I mentioned, we've prepared a few slides, really just a guide to cover for some of the pointers that Sagar sent us. And this will really be a free-flowing discussion. So it's mostly so you don't have to see our faces during the whole time. And without further ado, I'll do a quick introduction on myself and then pass it to our speakers today. As you can see in the grid boxes, my name is Christian D'Alessandro. I'm based here in New York City. I lead the sales team at Synaptic, been with the company for about 3 years. And prior to this, I was at CB Insights for close to 6 years, helped build and scale out their sales team. Sagar, I'll pass it to you and then off to Rohit.
Thanks, Christian. It's nice to be here. My name is Sagar. I'm a partner and CTO at RunwayFBU. We are an early stage VC investing out of Norway into software-driven technology companies across Europe, primarily within industrial software. I've worked with other investment funds before, invested in a bit of slightly over 100 startups globally earlier, and also worked for a global browser company much earlier in my career.
And Sagar, I think you're being humble as well, not noting that Sagar is one of the top 20 data-driven VC voices recently recognized. For those of you that might not follow Sagar on LinkedIn, he has great content as well to pay attention to. Rohit, off to you. Thanks, Sagar.
Of course. Sagar, people would love to...
Sorry, I'll do a minor correction. Top 100, not top 20 yet.
Oh, I stand corrected. Sorry, Sagar.
No worries.
Hey everyone, I'm Rohit. I'm one of the co-founders of Synaptic. I come from a tech and programming background myself. Before starting Synaptic, I used to lead the tech team at VY Capital, pretty much doing what I'm doing right now, which is helping investors do more with data. And I've been doing this for 10 years. And over the years, what I have seen is like the industry is extremely dynamic. Like the tech changes, new tools come along, new data sets are added constantly. The fundamentals, of course, don't change, but the industry, I think, reinvents itself pretty much like every 2-3 years. And I'm really excited for today because we thought like it'll be great to talk with a customer that we respect about the current landscape in 2024, but also revisit and revise, so to say, the fundamentals of being data driven. Like I said, like really excited to like kick this off with Sagar.
Absolutely. And kicking this off, one of the questions that we get asked a lot is what it even means to be data driven. And Rohit and Sagar, we'd be really curious to get your perspectives on this. Let's start with talking about what data driven means to each of you and why funds should use it. I think most importantly for everyone in the audience, the big question is what's the value of being data driven once we establish what that means. So I'll pass it to you, Sagar. Would love to get your take on this.
Yeah, so a typical fund, with its investment analysts or investment managers, let's call them the investment team, right? And that's how I'll refer to them from now on. So the investment team, it normally goes through a process of, sourcing startups, which is a lot, screening a couple of them, or actually screening all of them, but really deep diving into a couple of them, selecting a few of them to actually invest in. And beyond the investment stage, you want to help scale the companies you've actually invested in. Now, through the entire pipeline of sourcing from the sourcing to screening, selecting, and scaling, and that's kind of what you have listed here and under activities, right? There's a lot of processes and there's a lot of human touch involved, and obviously, every time you include some human touch, there will be things will take time, right? You want to speed up those processes, and if you understand how data and technology works, you can speed up a lot of manual processes by automating things. Now, that's an easy answer, but if you look at the more complexities of an investment, right, you have to understand you also need to do this in a very unbiased way, which is reliable and also scalable, brings in some layer of transparency and scalability in it. You cannot have that approach with a manually driven process. You need to think data driven, which then includes, either systems or processes or tools that actually make the process a bit more reliable, makes it sort of unbiased. You do want to find the best opportunities and not the best, what you think is the best or what an investment analyst might think is the best. Something that actually matches with your mandate, that, data can more purely detect than perhaps humans can.
So Rohit, would be really interested to get your perspective on this too. I think you'd share a lot of similar sentiments, probably from your experience at BY.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think the second part is like really relevant, which is like VC at its core is a very much a relationship or a people industry, right? Like investors have unique styles, investors have unique ways of like accessing deal flow, and you don't want to like take away from that. But like as Sagar mentioned, like having that like added bit of added bit of like removing bias from the process, like being more systematic about it, is really important if VC needs to mature itself to like the next level. And there's this added benefit that like removing bias, actually, A, it makes you more money. B, it's also fairer, which is also a mandate that a lot of like VC funds have now, which is like to invest in like more diverse founders, to invest in founders that you typically would be underrepresented, so to say, in the broad group. And data helps you do that. Data really takes away the internal biases that like people unintentionally like apply, takes away some of that. So I think data is like really, really important in that. I don't know if Sagar like Runway has that like perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Bias, of course, is one thing. For us, it was also a challenge of manpower. We don't have that many people to put on a lot of startups. So, 10, 15 years ago, depending on which region you're investing in, you may or may not have a very large deal flow. And by deal flow, I'm referring to the number of companies that exist or apply, right? So that number is huge now. There are far more startups being created today than ever before, and that probably will keep increasing. So how do you find that needle in the haystack that matches your mandate and your criteria and what you're looking to invest in based on your beliefs and your networks, right? And so scaling that in a much more meaningful and sustainable way, data-driven is the only way left. And yeah, absolutely, becoming unbiased is quite significant as well, because as the LPs or of a fund or fund, how do you make sure that your investment analysts aren't skipping over companies because they either didn't understand it or they didn't connect with it, or they didn't, based on whatever bias we all possess, did not believe in the founders. You want to overcome those limitations, and that you want to do, right away.
Absolutely. And the common question that naturally flows from this is, where do you even start as a fund? And I think that segues well into how do you overcome some of those limitations? What are practices you implement? Would love to continue on that point, Sagar, and just hear your perspective on, even with limited number of people, where did RunwayFBU get started? What would you recommend to any new funds on this or existing funds?
Yeah, so I think to each its own, really. You kind of find your own way of figuring out how to get it working. The way the way it worked for me now is I did something similar in my previous in the previous fund where I was CTO as well. So it made it a bit easier when we started this, and I started this from scratch. So which meant I could design the whole thing how I wanted to. And a key underlying aspect of that was, one, I track every single thing. Everything is data. If it's even our email signatures and people click on that, I want that tracked. I want to know whose emails are getting clicked, what's driving us deals. I don't use all of that, not today, but eventually I hope to use a lot of that information, right? But that's the point of kind of sometimes just thinking about having a data-driven approach. You try to capture as much as possible, because things will come along the way and that might become relevant. The idea always is you have a lot of objectives if you're an investor or whatever, and you either have or will collect a lot of data along the way. Every single piece of data is connected to one of your objectives. And now either that is a very thin line or maybe it's a thick tightrope. That depends on how much you can, and that you can test, right? You can change activities related to the data, and you can see the impact it has on your objectives. I'm being too ambiguous now, but I hope it's understandable. So I think that was maybe the most important bit. We wanted to collect all the data. We knew what our goals were. So that was maybe the first, the pillar that you see now, right? Setting the goals is really important. As an investment fund, it's quite easy, really. We want to look at as many companies as possible, and we want to find the best ones out of them and invest in them. Those are fairly measurable tactics, and those are fairly measurable goals. Now, getting the internal alignment, easy for us because we recruited the team from scratch. So we recruited people who believed in data-driven, who were always already aligned with our thought process. But yeah, getting that buy-in is super crucial, because if they're not the ones using this approach, nothing is actually going to work. And of course, despite how tech savvy the team that we've recruited might be, we still need to find a way on how we all look at data and utilize it. I'll stop here because I want to hear Rohit's perspective as well before maybe diving a bit deeper.
Sure. I had a question, by the way, and I was really curious about this. Did you face resistance from your case is pretty special in the sense that like you said, you started from the scratch, and you always had this thing about building a data-driven culture. For other funds where this isn't the case, it's even harder. But even after this, did you face were there instances of resistance from the team? Okay, Sagar, maybe we're being too data-driven, so to say.
I'm sure there was, but I think it went a bit unnoticed in a way, because this is based on my personal experience, right? So you communicate the value of being data driven far earlier, And yeah, there have been cases where, why do we require so much data on every single thing we look at? Manual work, right? I needed a lot of manual data to be collected or enriched manually, which is one of the reasons why we, chose you guys, because it could help us actually enrich data in a more automated way. Yeah. But before that happened, enriching data manually was a tedious and it was a laborious exercise, right? And so why do all that work? And that had to be proven. So it did take time, but once you demonstrate the value of collecting the data, it becomes a lot more easier. So, and the value of the data comes in many different shapes and sizes. I won't go into the detail, right? But I'll give you two examples. One, the value of data was significantly useful in presenting what we were doing back to our LP. It's nice to show them the detail with which we understand what we're doing. That's I believe something that everybody understood quite easily, because we were early. Very few investments. How do you prove what you're doing is worthwhile? And that was one way. And I think the other will come along when we see and we prove that the investments we've done by having more enriched data, by understanding what is working better and what isn't, I think that will come later. But in an investment fund, that kind of realization comes over time, and it may never arrive either, right? But the hypothesis, the scientific hypothesis, is that there is value to be seen.
Of course, no, I think that ties very similarly into my experience at VY Capital as well, building this at VY Capital. And I always like to think or say that being data driven is not just about technology, the human aspect that you mentioned. And it might feel strange coming from someone whose job, whose company's mandate is to sell software, sell technology, sell tools to people. But I think the human aspect is really, really important. Of course, technology is part of the calculus, but it's just one part. Like you mentioned, any product, any new process will come with its own friction, and you need to demonstrate, and you need to show investors that this is worth it. The added friction is worth it. Even though we try to minimize that friction, but there's always going to be some complexity added because of being data driven. And investors and everybody within the organization needs to be convinced that it's worth it, and that is where the magic happens, in my opinion. At VY, when we joined, it was we had the mandate from the top. Alexander was very clear that hey, we want to be more data driven. We went in, we started collecting data, started building a bunch of scrapers. But the real unlock happened when we created this platform that was easy to use for people, self-serve platform. People just transformed from using data for specific situations to using data just being more data driven, to be honest, because data was more accessible to them. And that is something that I take with me a lot when building Synaptic, focusing on humans, focusing on what is the value that I unlock rather than on the cool technology or the feature that I'm building.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I've had similar experiences as well. You need to be much more user focused in everything, really, on all kinds of products that you build. Yeah. It's much easier to get the adoption that is needed in this approach, especially.
This is something I think a lot of fund managers face questions with too. Once you have that internal alignment, you then start asking this question of, do we build entirely from scratch, or do we buy data and tech? And I would be really curious to hear, Sagar, how you all have thought about that. I think you've been touching on this already, but just high level, build versus buy. How do you think about that approach within your fund, and how should other funds think about that as well?
Yeah, I've reflected on this quite a bit in different times of my careers when and in different organizations when we've been almost tasked with the same question. I think what I've gathered so far and what I try to practice here is I would always build first, but only to gain the knowledge of what to buy. I think that's kind of needed. It's important. Unless you of course build similar stuff, then you know what to buy, right? But typically when you're trying out to do something new and something innovative and something that might not be completely clear, or maybe the team doesn't really understand exactly what they need or what they want, that approach has typically worked better for us. internally. It might also mean that maybe we don't build, but we buy something, simple and cheap just to test the waters with before really expanding onto something that's much more stable and much more long-term. But I guess, Rohit, you guys at Synaptic, I mean, building a product is far different than building some tools for an investment house, right? So,
absolutely. No, I was just thinking about it, and it's funny, like reflecting on my previous like selling experiences, like selling to prospects, like the customers that we have, is that people, if they have previous product and tech experience, are more open and more willing to like buy rather than build, versus people who haven't like built things are more willing to like hey, we can build this. I can have this built. And it's really funny because like as tech people, I think we understand that the real leverage is in solving the problem and not like building something, versus like that because that lesson we have learned painfully in our lives before. So our first reaction is, can I buy something that like helps me solve this rather than like build something? But that is a lesson that like folks that haven't had that painful lessons need to learn on their own, I guess.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But if you build stuff, the challenges come after you've built it, and
Exactly.
and no one wants to repeat that in an environment, especially in an environment like an investment fund, right? I mean, we're not a tech company. Let's not pretend to be one. I mean, as far as building a couple of tools and so forth, I think that's, of course, absolutely. I'm a tech guy working in a fund. What's my job here, right? If I don't build stuff. So, I don't mind building stuff or having, other funds build their own stuff, especially if they have capacity to hire more developers or, other relevant tech folks. But yeah, the challenge comes after you build, and then what, right? Software companies will outbeat you. So if you're trying to create something of true value, that product probably exists out there.
And like the point around that is like of course, like you need to build, but what do you build? Like, do you build the infrastructure layer that has already been built before, or do you build like more proprietary stuff that no one else is doing? And to my mind, like the answer is pretty clear. Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel. The question isn't build versus buy. I think the question is buy and then build on top. That is the right approach. Focus on things that matter, focus on things that like differentiate, and then just like outsource the parts that are like pretty standard to folks that have done this. Like for example, the data integration piece, and it is painful. Running data integrations is painful. Building one is like really easy. Making sure that it works week after week after week is the hard part. And it just makes sense to like outsource that like headache to someone else so that you can focus on more proprietary stuff, like stuff that like really matters to your workflows.
Yeah, that I totally agree with, and I think that's kind of how we run things as well. We're all kind of unique companies, unique funds, and they will be, the top layer essentially that is kind of unique to you and your mandate and your DNA and your organization, right? And the top layer consists of your workflows, your tools, systems, and everything else in between. And often you're building stuff across those for various reasons. Either there's no integrations, or maybe you do want to create something on top that is, not essentially that's something that you don't want to give away, right? There are some things you want to keep within your organization. Yes. If it's data or, the way you analyze things is an example, right? So there are certain elements that we also keep in-house and keep to ourselves. I internally I might refer to it as our secret sauce, and which I don't typically say outside. But that's the kind of top layer stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to utilize from tools that exist outside of your system.
Do you also think that like some of the desire to like build stuff in-house stems from like you mentioned like how being data driven can also be a differentiator for LPs. So does some of the desire to build stuff in-house stem from like showing to your LPs that you're differentiated because you're building stuff in-house? Like how much of that is a factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that probably helps. But in this scenario, this is something that we would actually build and use, right? So we have to truly believe it's for our benefit and makes us better, faster, etc. And not something that we just, market to our LPs. I think then it would be, so yeah, if your question is, would it help? Absolutely. That is one thing that you do to kind of differentiate yourselves as GPs from other GPs, that you have the technical ability to, think beyond and have a top layer that is unique to you. And I'm sure some LPs find that interesting. But really, I think that's just a benefit that happens by accident. I mean, the true value is you are actually creating something useful for yourself that helps with, like I said earlier, sourcing, screening, or selecting or scaling a company. Then it's truly beneficial.
Yeah.
Both you were touching on.
Sorry, Christian. Maybe I'll give a short example, right? So so the way we've sort of set up our organization, right? We have certain workflows and certain workflows with checkpoints along the way. Things we need to go through, etc., etc. Now, full disclosure, I don't have all of this set up, but the idea, the plan, is to have that workflow automated in a way that it's either a human or machine that can carry out these workflows and carry out these tasks and checkpoints. And that's something very unique to us. That's something I wouldn't be able to kind of buy off the shelf. There might be tools that, of course, allow me to do those activities off the shelf. But then again, I might want to preserve that workflow. I might want to preserve some of those agents, human or machine, to something that we have built ourselves. And I think, having if we able to, we have parts of it, but if we are able to do that successfully, will an LP appreciate that? Absolutely. But will it also help us in really scaling up everything we do? Absolutely, right? So I think that's probably the only time when we would actually invest in such an opportunity. And then that's the top layer that I refer to.
Yeah, I think my point was more like, I absolutely agree. Like, those are stuff that like people should build in-house, because it just makes sense. My point was like generally to the aversion that like some other firms have around like buying stuff versus like investing in their own in-house solution, like which is like own the complete stack. That was the question around. But the example that you mentioned is absolutely something that like people should invest in. Like, it is worthwhile to spend a fair amount of money on this.
Yeah.
We've been touching on these points. It'd be really interesting and to hear a bit more about the thought process. I think Sagar, you touched on this in detail as well, but curious how you guys think about tool selection, just piggybacking off of a lot of the points you shared.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I mentioned a bit of this already now. I think maybe the one bit I haven't mentioned so far is perhaps, the kind of the end-to-end integrations, really. I mean, there's, from the point kind of data enters to the point of, an eventual, I don't know, let's say exit, right? That's the dream, right? But of course, you don't exit everything, but in a way you do exit everything. So from gate A to the last gate of the entire investment process, data is going to move across a bunch of different workflows, go through a lot of automation. It's going to get pulled and pushed and changed, and and it will have its own life as well, right, through the entire timeline. So kind of getting that workflow, getting the right kind of tools that enable end-to-end integration across that entire workflow, that actually understands how the data flows and how it lives through a startup's or the fund's journey. I think that's quite important, but it's also very challenging. I mean, I think this is a space that still I think it's still quite immature in how the space is today, but it's absolutely maturing at a much faster pace today than 4 or 5 years ago when we kind of started thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely, and that just reminds me of how many new players come to the market every day that we often hear about. And Rohit, you have a wealth of knowledge through the clients we've worked with here related to what Sagar was just touching on. Is maybe in a space where this is newer, what are some of the questions that funds should be asking versus questions we often hear frequently from buyers when they're doing their tool selection process?
I think one thing that funds, I like from the evaluations that the takeaways that I have from the evaluation is like, people focus on like just one use case, which is fine. Like you need to start with one use case, but being data driven just means that like data, once you have data collated, structured, and you're able to use it and like easily, you're going to have a lot more use cases that are unlocked all the time. So people focus only on one use case rather than like thinking about it holistically. Like, what are the different use cases that will be solved by like data for me? And then this oftentimes people focus on like the wrong headline metric as well. Like, for example, like people focus on number of companies that a platform has, which is like some platforms have tens of millions of companies. But to be honest, your investable universe is not tens of millions of companies. It's probably 100,000 or like 200,000 companies at max. And the tens of millions of companies sound nice, but they're only going to add noise when you're like screening on these companies, etc. Right? So focusing on the right metrics, I think, is important. Focusing on like multiple use cases, like, hey, if I have data, like thinking a little bit through or like what else can I do out of it, is important as well. And then the third point, and the most delightful like evaluations that we have had of the platform is like when people had like a clear plan around this, and also a plan of running a very clean trial, which is like involve teammates, and then do a systematic feedback process with them. Like, don't like send them a form, tell them like how important this is to you. Would you like, you've used the tool for a week, would you be unhappy if this tool was taken away from you? Tell me why. What are use cases that you can like build on top of this? Those were like really, really great evaluations for us, Christian. If you remember, like you were part of some of those as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, those always go through this. You need a dedicated person that understands the criteria of the evaluation process. And I'm being conscientious of time because Sagar was touching on this a bit as well, Rohit, in the prior slides, talking about automating workflows. That ties in nicely to a question that everyone is asking that I'd love to get to, which is, it's on every investor's mind. Our investors talk about this often, but how do you all think about generative AI in the investment process? And more specifically, what can you do now? And then what do you think you will be able to do in the future? This is something we get asked this question every week, and would love your take on this, Sagar, and Rohit, yours as well, because I know you spoke to many of our clients on this.
Yeah, this is the 2024 in our webinar title, I guess. Like the big thing in 2024 is like, how do we use AI in our investment processes?
Yeah, that's two small letters, but what an impact. I guess, when it comes to kind of collating data together and summarizing information, I think that's kind of already available, to quite an extent. You can use most tools, customized or not, to kind of do those operations, and that kind of helps quite a bit. Document summarization is something that it can do quite accurately without much hallucinations. That's beneficial. That already saves a lot of time. But I think to go from there to many steps forward, I'm not sure if it's entirely there yet either. There's lots of challenges. I mean, everyone is trying to do certain things. Runway, we do certain things ourselves as well, to try and map out a lot more, utilizing data and some form of AI, but also looking into our historical data and our historical analysis. So, when we started this discussion, we talked about, capturing every data that we can capture, right? So we've looked at a few thousand companies. We tried to manually, put in why we liked something or why we did not like something, in the hopes that, we will be able to train, let's just, I don't like to call it an AI because it's more of an algorithm right now at some stage, right? but let's just say AI for marketing purposes, is that, we can use that training data to train AI to take slightly better decisions. But one size AI that fits all is, especially within the investment landscape, is possibly quite difficult to achieve. A startup for fund one may not be interesting at all for fund two, and that's because the internal or the external network strengths that a VC has may be quite different, right? And that's because of their mandates, their LPs, and everything they have around them. I think, and that also defines how they do the investments, and how they manage their portfolio, or what kind of value-adding initiatives they are actually bringing to the table that might help startup A and may not be able to help startup B. There's so much variation between every different fund. They would essentially have to create their own set of AI to analyze, will investments, will an investment in startup A give me more success versus an investment in startup B?
Yeah.
That's fortune telling, and I don't believe in that. But so that's maybe, that's almost like when you have a quant or AGIs to kind of really understand, future trends and so forth. But if you scale it down significantly, right? If you look at what is the biggest problem a fund will have today, Rohit, you mentioned, some databases having, 10 million and give a lot of noise. That's a perfect place for AI to come in handy. I mean, whether it's 100,000, okay, even 100,000 is a lot, but let's just, 10 million is a nice number to look at. How do you reduce the 10 million startups into, let's say, 100 startups that your investment analyst should spend a lot more time on? I think that's perhaps much more easier to at least solve with AI. You will, of course, miss a lot, but you will at least find those 100 worth spending time on. A lot of that can actually be today achieved with, data collection, if you have enough enriched data available, and some kind of, summarization, either through, GPT-like models or others, which you can sort of enhance with some models that you build on top of your existing data. Obviously, if you have it. If you don't have it, well, start collecting data today, and you will get there at some point. Yeah, so can you use it? Yes, you can. But how far away is AI from really, taking over an investment manager's job? It's a long time away.
I completely resonate with that. And Sagar, where you hesitated to call it an AI, it's such, I completely have that same feeling myself as well. The term is extremely misused. I think from a technical perspective, what we think of as an AI is very different from what everybody is thinking of AI right now. The other thing about AI, I share the same way as well. It is still not there. It's great for demos, but to build a consistent product that you can use out of that. Every board meeting for me is my investor saying when are we going to have Synaptic be AI driven? And I'm we already use what you would call AI in a lot of places, but I don't think people have some lay people don't have that understanding of how it's great in certain use cases. It's great for certain things, but the conception of hey, this will solve everything for me. This will be a panacea for everything or a lot of problems that I have. It's just not there. But it's exciting. It's extremely exciting. We are very excited about it. We are using it in a lot of places. Another place where we started using this is I think AI enables, like you mentioned, it enables us to even develop new data sets that were previously very hard to do. One of the things Synaptic has started doing is extracting data out of portfolio company board decks and integrating that with other data sets that we already have. And that would have been very tedious and not as effective to scale without AI, without LLMs, as it is now with us using LLMs. We've been experimenting with a model to look at a chart and automatically extract data out of that as well. So we are very excited about all the possibilities there. But for example, in our use case, the chart model gets us to 85% accuracy. But I can't go to my customers and say hey, we have 85% accuracy, and I can't tell you where when it's right or wrong. I don't have that confidence intervals. So what we do is like we have a human layer that the AI does some of the work, the humans do the rest of the work, and that is how we're like thinking about scaling this. Of course, like things can change, and like we can have like AI do a lot more of the work, especially at the pace that it's changing. So we're very excited about the technology, but like you mentioned, it's not there in my head. There are use cases that we are like building, and maybe GPT-5 would be the one where like we start seeing that like inflection point.
Yeah, but perhaps, but then well, let's not get into the details of computational power, and can you afford that much compute, because you will want to process a lot more. But what you mentioned about reliable data, right? I mean, even the word reliable has AI within it, but you can trust the word reliable because that's what it stands for. But when you see AI without the word reliable, and that's what's typical, right? How do you really trust the output from AI? I mean, if you're looking at the traditional GPT-like models, there is a lot of hallucinations. You're absolutely right. It can be used to enrich more data, and we've used it ourselves. To enrich some data we have, or to at least get to a point of getting, feeling more comfortable with the data we have. So earlier I mentioned about, it's a very laborious process to kind of enrich data manually. Synaptic helps with that. But, if I want to go to a couple of steps beyond, even Synaptic, using AI with the information and data that we gather through, access to data rooms and other stuff that you guys don't have access to, we're able to enrich it even further. So there's absolutely great use cases, but I think maybe that's perhaps what, if there are other investment managers or funds, listening in, and that's one fantastic way to start your AI journey, right? Don't get, bummed out that, oh shit, I can't use AI for my investments. No, of course you can, use it for something that's easy and simple, start using it for enriching data, like Rohit mentioned. With the data sets that's kind of private and unique to you, right? Because that will never be accessible to other data platforms, but you might have that little bit of information that is relevant, that actually speeds up your investment processes. I think that's something that you can easily do today and start on right away. You don't have to wait for ChatGPT-5.
Of course. And I'm a big optimist when it comes to like computation costs. I believe like the trend will hold, and like we're going to have like cheap compute, AI focused compute pretty soon. It's already happening.
Yeah, no, I totally, yeah. So I totally hope so. But you always have to. So I assume most people on the call understand what context means within AI, and as long as you're able to contextualize who you are and what you are, or what kind of fund you are, right? The better response you get. But contextualizing every little thing about you is extremely challenging if you haven't had a data-driven approach. Which includes, it includes a lot of things, and just a flavor of that. What I can tell you is, it could include your entire network. It includes your entire portfolio, their investors, the co-investors, and their networks. It includes maybe all the events you've been to, or all the other kind of companies, or it also includes the previous careers your investment team or your network might have access to. So the bigger the context you're able to create about yourself as a fund, I think the better the likelihood of you actually getting value out of AI that will hopefully is about to come.
Sagar and Rohit, just taking stock of time. Thanks for your thoughts and comments. I'd open this up to any closing thoughts on these points, and then I'm starting to see some questions come in that I'd like to make sure we can answer for the audience with the Q&A. But any closing thoughts for either of you?
I'll say what Nike says, right? Just do it. I mean, don't wait. Just collect data. Try to be more data driven. Use AI wherever you can. And just start with it. You will end up realizing, and you end up discovering a lot more once you start. Don't try to plan. Don't try to plan building a spaceship without taking the first step.
Yeah, I think those are words to live by. For like not just like being data driven, but for anything, just like like doing something is much better than like being half data driven is much better than not being data driven at all. Like is how I would put it.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Sagar, the first question's for you. I love those sentiments as well. Action creates information, and I think this is one that segues well from the audience. What was your best data investment for Runway in terms of ROI?
Yeah, it's a good question, but to be honest, we haven't calculated any kind of ROI, right? But if I assume ROI in terms of if I take ROI in terms of market feedback or response or attraction, then I think it's probably to do a lot more with trying to build our own set of AI agents that help us screen companies. That has, in one sense, reduced our need to hire investment associates. So that's one form of ROI, although we've never really put a number on it. But that's perhaps not as important as perhaps getting some recognition and attraction to our potential future LPs. So given that we were able to do that within the kind of the half part of our current fund, which means we will start preparing for our next fund in about a year from now. We will be mature enough in order to have the right conversations with the right kind of LPs, and I think that's probably the best ROI we would have achieved. I hope there's a lot more. I also hope to kind of utilize more data-driven strategies to actually help scale up the companies we actually invest in. We're too young in our investment cycle and our fund cycle to kind of deliver very meaningful value back to our startups with a data-driven approach. But I think that's probably the next biggest ROI I'm looking forward to, creating value for the companies we put money in.
Very interesting. And this next one is, I think, a relevant one for everyone here. Curious your perspective. Most of these are for you, Sagar, coming in. So one coming out, and Rohit, I think you could chime in on this one as well if you'd like after Sagar. But for just a VC starting out building internal tools, how big should the internal data engineering team be compared to the investment team?
Yeah, Rohit, you want to take that first?
I think it depends. The answer, like always, is it depends. But if you want to recreate like something like I can give you we built our own internal tool to help us with data engineering, like sort of an Apache Airflow equivalent. Like when we built it, like Apache Airflow wasn't around, so we built our own. We have people like maintaining that, like building on top of that. We have people running a bunch of integrations on that. And I would say that our data engineering organization is somewhere around 8 to 10 people, like counting everyone. It's somewhere around 8 to 10 people. And then of course, there are adjacencies in terms of like other things that we do on top of that. For a fund that's not focused on like building a platform like ours, I think and if you still want to integrate like a fair number of data sources, you would want at least like 2 engineers. In my head, just because like the upstream changes quite often, like things break down all the time, and 2 engineers is where I would put it, which is not something that a lot of funds can do, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. The answer really varies on your fund size and how much operational budget you actually have to hire those individuals. So some very large funds have upwards of 50 data scientists on their teams, and small funds between 1 and 5. We're quite a small fund ourselves. I have me, but I do have funds available to hire external resources when and if. But then you need to have that internal. You need to have some internal expertise to know what you're buying, basically.
Absolutely. And on the same thread, we'll go to the next question on the same thread of people and operational questions. I think this one sounds like will be more relevant answer in terms of any tips for hiring the right people? What can that can lead the internal transformation at a fund? What kinds of profiles, skills should we look for in folks you hire?
Yeah, so obviously with some tech background, that absolutely helps. But if it's a person with a tech background who is, well, hopefully been an entrepreneur themselves, right? I think there is I think if you have a tech person with a fairly good understanding of what it is to build a startup and what it is to raise funding, I think that's extremely complementary to the rest of the organization and the team that person becomes a part of. If you hire someone with almost little or no knowledge of how startups actually work or how businesses or products are actually built, they bring very little value to the rest of the organization. So try to, of course, see if someone can fit, if even partly fit within the investment organization, to actually someone who can actually have and hold those conversations with investment managers, analysts, so that they truly understand, the audience they're actually trying to create something for. Assuming that's the first audience to make something for, the eventual next set of audience is likely the startups they invest in, the founders. And so that's why I kind of refer back to, if they have some kind of startup entrepreneurial or product development background, tech expertise, they would be able to understand their end customer who they will actually be building stuff for. I think that would help if you're typically only hiring one or two persons for that kind of role.
Rohit, any thoughts you want to add? The next question's relevant for both of you as well. I know you all had these questions at VY.
The other question, or like
just around hiring, if you wanted to add on to that. Otherwise, I'll jump into there's 3 questions in one coming up next that are all the same.
Yeah, I think Sagar like encapsulated like this pretty well, and like this is not only true for like hiring for a fund, but like the thing that he mentioned about like hiring people who have some startup experience, who are entrepreneurial in some way. They bring a lot of value outside of the core function that they hired for as well. Like the core JD requirement, they just bring a lot of value outside of that as well. And especially for a fund, like in a larger company, you can still go by without that. Like in a mid-sized company, you can go by without that. But in a fund, which by its very nature is like a very small focused operation, doing more, I guess, like at VY, we used to do a lot more. Like we were a small team. We used to do a lot of things in-house. We used to do a lot of things ourselves. I was the IT admin, for example. I used to like handle the servers. I used to do all of that. But like just bringing that spirit of like, hey, I understand the objectives and I'm working towards them, rather than like just focusing on like, this is the narrow remit that I have, and that's the only thing that I care about.
Absolutely. Next question we have, and there's multiple questions around tooling. A high level, I'll just pick this one that summarizes 3 that have come in. Any good tool recommendations for a small early stage fund? And you could lump in a similar question as what are emerging VC tools that you all are seeing come up this year? The first part, though, I think Sagar's directed more at you. Is any good tool recommendations for a small early stage fund? There's 2 or 3 that are similar to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I actually want to name any specific one to kind of, I'm not kind of affiliated or married to any tool really. I mean, then the reason, I have a good reason for it as well, because, I think the landscape is changing so fast. It's difficult to kind of, mention one name because it might be replaced by something better in a week from now. So what I normally do, what I have at least done now, obviously Synaptic is one. Of course, let's just get that out of the way, right? Let's move away from that one. That's an obvious one.
Right.
but kind of beyond that, right? there will never be kind of one thing that fits one size fits all perspective here. It depends on your VC stack, depends on the capabilities of your team, what you're actually trying to do. Because you got to remember that your data flows from point A to point Z, and that's a very, very long workflow over a very long period. So the tools you end up using, they need to integrate in a very meaningful way. So, and I'm being very vague here, but that's just how it is. It's so difficult to tell general answer on one particular tool.
Absolutely. And I'm checking time. We have time for one final question here. There's a handful to pick from. I think for the ones that we didn't get to, we'll get back to folks individually on these as best we can. I think this one would be a nice one to tie out with is what are the trade-offs? And we've talked about this a little bit. Rohit even commented on this some, but what are the trade-offs between data quality versus data usability / ingestion is what the question said. So should one be prioritized over the other? How do you consider that? Quality versus ingestion and usability of data. We can also skip if we want to tie out with one other question as we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I can take that one if that helps. I mean, at least that's kind of our perspective on data quality versus data usability or ingestion. So for the moment we focus more on usability and ingestion. I think we have belief quality will improve, and that is something that's easy to kind of fix eventually as you increase data sources, or the enriched data you get is better, or you find better means to improve the quality. But as long as you fix the data usability or ingestion and also its life cycle through your workflows, I think that's crucial. So it's almost like you got to build the infrastructure. You have to build the road, right? And you have to believe that your data will come and just smoothly go across it. So the quality is something I would probably prioritize a bit less on.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I think the trade-off in my head as well, it is always a balance. Like if I have a great data set that gives me a lot, that has high conviction, but a little less reliability. It's right, but when it's right, it really matters, but it's only right 30% of the time. I would then still go for that, right? Because being right 30% of the time is still great when it comes to investing. So that trade-off is always there. And I think about that when looking at data sets, for example, revenue data. Revenue is highly inaccurate for a lot of companies, but when it's right, it gives you a lot of it gives you a data point that you really care about a company. And that's a data set that I would then use, even though I know it's inaccurate in a lot of cases. So it's a trade-off, but I think the trade-off in my head at least is around how important is dependent on how better of a picture does the data point give me.
Yeah, sure. How decisive that one single data point is, I think that will matter quite a lot on the quality question. But if it's more, generic or general data points that you're looking to gather, if one thing is too far off, some things are not. They kind of balance out, at least within the sourcing screening aspect of it.
Rohit and Sagar, that brings us to time. For everyone that joined in, we will be sure to share the recording. There are a number of other questions we didn't get to, so thank you to the audience for sending those in. It was really good to see the engagement on the Q&A side. And Sagar, thank you again for your time. We, of course, really value our relationship with you as a client and value your participation today. So thanks for sharing your insights.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity, Christian.
Thanks, Sagar. Thanks for your time. And it was great talking to you. And hopefully sometimes I'll make the trip, or you'll make the trip to India, or I'll make the trip to Norway, and we can chat more about this.
Yeah, I absolutely would love to.
Well, thanks everyone. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch with the recording link. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yes.